The emergency beacon tore through the void like the dying scream of a murdered child. Commander Jake Reynolds had heard distress calls before, pirates, raiders, natural disasters, but this sound made his blood freeze in his veins. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was the sound of an entire species facing extinction. The bridge of the UES. Thunderstrike fell silent as the alien transmission played for the fourth time. You know that moment when everyone in a room suddenly realizes they're witnessing history? That's exactly what happened. 37 hardened space veterans, people who'd seen combat across a dozen star systems, sat motionless like children hearing their first ghost story. Help us. ... please. The metal death comes for our younglings. The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything in the galactic database. Musical, almost wind-like, but heavy with desperation that transcended species barriers. Fear, it turns out, sounds the same whether you're human or whatever these beings were. Are peaceful. We know not war. Reynolds' grip on the command rail tightened until his knuckles went bone-white. Peaceful. In a galaxy where even the most civilized species maintained battle fleets, these aliens were admitting they had no defenses. It was like watching a lamb ask a pack of wolves for protection. Our children hide in the deep places, but the machines find them. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, the ship's tactical officer, let out a barely audible gasp. She had 3 kids back on Earth. Reynolds saw her hand unconsciously move to the photo on her console. 2 boys and a girl with gap-toothed smiles, completely unaware their mother was floating in the darkness between stars, listening to another parent's nightmare. If any warriors hear this cry, come quickly. This is Verdant Prime. We have ... maybe one day. One day. Reynolds had commanded warships for 15 years, had calculated response times for emergency situations across half the galaxy. The nearest human patrol was 6 days away at maximum burn. The closest military installation was 8 days out. These aliens were asking for a miracle that simple physics couldn't deliver, unless ... static swallowed the desperate voice, leaving only the hum of the ship's engines and the collective held breath of 37 souls who'd just heard innocence die in real time. You ever notice how the universe has a twisted sense of timing? Right when you think you've heard the worst possible news, something even bigger drops into your lap. That's when Communications Officer Lisa Park's voice cut through the silence like a plasma torch through steel. Admiral Brooks on Priority Channel. Sir, her voice was tight, professional. But Reynolds caught the slight tremor. Lisa had been monitoring long-range communications for 12 years. She'd never sounded scared before. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the weathered face of Admiral Tom Brooks. Behind him, Fleet Command buzzed with the kind of frantic activity you only see during wartime. Dozens of uniformed figures moved with purpose across multiple levels of the command center, their voices creating a symphony of controlled chaos. But it was Brooks' eyes that made Reynolds' stomach drop. The Admiral's eyes burned with something beyond anger, beyond determination. They held the kind of cold fire you see in a parent who's just watched someone threaten their child. Reynolds, tell me you got that transmission. Every word, sir. Reynolds straightened unconsciously. The military, you learn to read the room fast. Right now the room was screaming that everything was about to change. What are our orders? Brooks leaned forward, and Reynolds saw something he'd never witnessed in 20 years of service. The Admiral's hands were shaking, not with fear, with rage so pure it had physical weight. We're sending everything we have. Every ship, every Marine, every pilot who can pull a trigger. Operation Guardian Angel goes live in 30 minutes. The bridge went dead quiet. Everything. In military terms, everything usually meant a sector fleet, maybe 50 ships, 100,000 personnel. But the way Brooks said it, ... the fleet roster began scrolling across Reynolds' tactical display. His heart nearly stopped. Ship. Names cascaded down the screen like a waterfall of destruction. Vengeance. Retribution. Iron Fist. Savage Dawn. Battleships. Carriers. Destroyers. Assault cruisers. The numbers kept climbing. 1,200 ships. 3.2 million. Personnel. The largest human war fleet ever assembled. And here's the kicker. They were mobilizing this armada for aliens they'd never met, never seen, never even heard of until 30 seconds ago. It was either the most noble gesture in galactic history or the most spectacular example of human stupidity ever recorded. "Sir," Reynolds said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of the question everyone was thinking, "we don't even know what they look like." "You want to know what separates humans from every other species in the galaxy? It's moments like this. When logic says one thing and heart says another, we choose heart every single time." Brooks smiled, and Reynolds saw something that made him understand why humanity had gone from cave dwellers to galactic power in just a few thousand years. It was the smile of a predator who just found something worth protecting. Doesn't matter. "Commander," they asked for help. "That's all we need to know." The countdown began. 29 minutes. 47 seconds to hyperspace jump. All across human space, warships were spinning up their engines. Marines were loading into drop pods. Pilots were running final checks on fighter craft. 3 million people were about to risk everything for strangers who might not even be carbon dash-based, but here's what really sent chills down Reynolds' spine. Not a single ship reported mechanical problems. Not one crew requested additional time. Not one commander asked for clarification or questioned the orders. Humanity was going to war, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, alien children were hiding in caves, counting down their final hours, completely unaware that the most dangerous species in the galaxy had just heard their parents cry for help. The universe was about to learn why humans were called Deathworlders. The verdant system exploded with light as 1,200 human warships tore through hyperspace and materialized in what could only be described as hell with a view. Commander Reynolds had witnessed fleet arrivals before, but this was different. When over 1,000 warships drop out of hyperspace simultaneously, reality itself seems to hiccup. The fabric of space rippled like water, energy discharges painted aurora across the void. And for a brief moment, the system's star seemed dim, compared to the raw power humanity had just unleashed, but it was what lay below that made Reynolds' blood turned to ice water. Verdant Prime should have been paradise. Intelligence reports had described a world that made Earth look like a concrete parking lot, crystal cities that grew like living things, floating gardens suspended in shimmering force fields, towers that spiraled into the clouds like frozen. Music, the kind of place poets write about, and architects dream of building instead. Reynolds stared at a planet that looked like it was being digested alive. Massive geometric nightmares crawled across the surface like mechanical spiders, the size of Manhattan. Each one left behind a trail of gray death that spread outward in perfect circles, consuming everything in its path. Forests, cities, even the ocean itself turned to lifeless ash. Wherever these things touched, you know that feeling when you see something so wrong? So fundamentally evil that your brain briefly refuses to process it. That's what hit every human on every bridge in the fleet. Grown warriors, people who'd seen combat across dozens star systems, stared at their screens in stunned horror. "Christ," whispered Tactical Officer Sarah Mitchell, her voice barely audible. "What are those things?" "The machine plague," Reynolds replied, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 dead worlds. "They consume everything. Organic matter, metals, energy itself. They don't stop until there's nothing left but gray dust." Lieutenant Mark Hayes, barely 25, and still young enough to believe the universe made sense, looked up from his sensor station with wide eyes. "Sir, reading massive indigenous life signs? They're still alive down there." His voice cracked on the last word. "Still fighting, still fighting." Reynolds felt something cold and sharp form in his gut. Intelligence had been crystal clear about. The Verdant, they were pacifists who'd achieved spaceflight through pure scientific cooperation. Their entire military consisted of 3 patrol boats designed for asteroid cleanup. They had no weapons, no armor, no concept of warfare, but they were still fighting. Picture this. Imagine your worst nightmare is chasing your kids through your house, and all you have to defend them with is a kitchen knife and pure parental rage. That's what was happening on the planet below. Beings who had never known violence were dying by the thousands. buying time with their lives for their children to hide just a little deeper, run just a little farther. Sir, thermal imaging shows defensive positions around every major population center. Hayes continued, his voice steadying as professionalism kicked in. They're actually trying to slow the machines down. Reynolds pulled up the tactical overview and felt his heart break. Scattered across the planet's surface, tiny heat signatures, individual verdant civilians had formed pathetic little barricades using whatever they could find. Garden tools, scientific equipment, even furniture. They were throwing themselves at machines that could disintegrate battle tanks, armed with nothing but desperation and love. It was the most futile and most heroic thing Reynolds had ever witnessed. Admiral Brooks, this is Thunderstrike Actual, Reynolds said into his communicator, his voice tight with controlled rage. Request immediate orbital bombardment authorization.
Yes.
Let's turn these mechanical bastards into scrap metal. The response came back instantly, and it carried the weight of command decision that would haunt Brooks for the rest of his life. Negative, Reynolds. We're reading 2 million friendly life signs in those cities. We extract them first, then we glass everything. Else, 2 million. Reynolds stared at the numbers on his screen. 2 million terrified civilians trapped in a steadily shrinking circle of death, protected only by others who were dying by the minute to buy them time. You want to know the difference between smart tactics and human stubbornness? Smart tactics said to evacuate whatever civilians they could reach quickly, then obliterate the planet from orbit. Human stubbornness said they were going to save every single innocent life down there, even if it killed them. Reynolds grinned, and it was the kind of smile that made predators nervous. Marine Colonel Davis, prepare for full planetary assault. Every transport, every dropship, every escape pod with engines attached. The response crackled back immediately. Colonel Jack Davis had been a Marine for 22 years, had led ground assaults on 15 different worlds, and had never lost a civilian he was tasked to protect. His voice carried the confidence of a man who specialized in impossible missions. Roger that, Commander. All units, this is Guardian Angel Actual. We're going in heavy and we're bringing everyone home. Across the fleet, organized chaos erupted. 800,000 human Marines began loading into assault craft with the kind of efficiency that only comes from endless training and absolute purpose. Transport bays that had been quiet minutes before now thundered with the sound of boots, weapons being checked, and the low rumble of engines spinning up. But here's what gave. Reynolds' chillsit wasn't the sound of machinery that dominated the fleet communications. It was singing, ancient songs passed down through military tradition. Hymns about sacrifice and honor, ballads about the things worth dying for. War chants that had been sung by human warriors since they first picked up spears to protect their tribes. 800,000 voices joined in harmony across the void. Creating a sound that would have made angels weep and demons flee, the aliens had called for help. They were about to discover why humans were called. Deathworlders, Marine Sergeant Rick Johnson, a 10-year veteran with 3 kids back on Mars, finished loading his plasma rifle and looked around at his squad. 19 men and women, average age 24, all volunteers. It's all about to drop into a nightmare that had consumed entire civilizations. Up, Marines, Johnson called out over the engine noise. We're about to do something that's either going to make us legends or get us all killed. Probably both. Private Lisa Chen, fresh out of boot camp and still young enough to think she was immortal, raised her hand. Sarge, what if we can't save them all? Johnson looked at her with the kind of steady confidence that had kept Marines alive for centuries. Then we die trying, Chen. That's what we do. The first wave of transports began launching, carrying humanity's finest into the teeth of mechanical death. On every ship, the same scene played out: warriors saying goodbye to photos of loved ones, checking weapons one final time, preparing to do what humans had always done when innocents were threatened. They were about to charge into hell singing songs of defiance, and somewhere on the planet below, alien children huddled in darkness, completely unaware that the most dangerous species in the galaxy had just heard their parents' prayers. The real war was about to begin. The dropship screamed through Verdant Prime's atmosphere like falling meteors wrapped in fury and desperation. Marine Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson gripped his plasma rifle and studied the faces of his squad in the dim red combat lighting that made everyone look like they were already bleeding. 22 years old on average. Barely out of training. Every single one a volunteer. You know what's terrifying about youth? It's not their inexperience. It's their absolute certainty that they can save the world. Thompson had been their age once, back when he thought courage meant not being afraid. Now he knew better. Real courage was being scared out of your mind and doing the job anyway. Listen up, Marines. Thompson shouted over the roar of engines that sounded like angry gods. Intel says the Verdant reproduce through seasonal cycles. Every adult down there is protecting maybe 1,000 younglings. We're not just saving a species, we're saving their entire future. Private Amy Johnson, 19 years old with freckles, and a smile that could light up a space station, raised her voice over the noise. Sarge, how do we know which ones are the kids? Thompson almost smiled, trusted teenager to ask the one question that mattered most. The young ones are smaller, maybe waist high. But here's the thing. Johnson, every single one of them is somebody's baby. Adult or child, we bring them all home. The transport shuddered violently as defensive fire from the machines lit up the hull like deadly fireworks. Through the porthole, Thompson could see dozens of other transports burning through the sky alongside them. While above, the fleet's massive guns carved lines of nuclear fire across the machine cities. The sight should have been beautiful, all that destructive power aimed at humanity's enemies. Instead, looked like the end of the world. 30 seconds to drop, the pilot's voice crackled through the comm system. Thompson activated his helmet display and felt his stomach drop. The tactical overview showed verdant population centers scattered across the continent like islands in an ocean of death. Each city was surrounded by an ever-tightening ring of gray devastation where the machines had already consumed everything: buildings, trees, even the soil itself. But here's what made Thompson's blood run cold. The machines weren't attacking randomly. They were methodical, efficient, almost surgical in their approach. They'd learned to herd their prey, driving the survivors into smaller and smaller pockets of resistance. Remember your identification protocols, Thompson called out as his squad checked their weapons one final time. If it's got 4 arms and flower petals for a head, it's friendly. Everything else gets vaporized. Private Johnson looked up from her rifle with wide eyes. Sarge, what if we can't tell the difference in combat? Then you ask questions first and shoot second? Thompson replied with the kind of steady authority that had kept Marines alive for 3 centuries. We're not here to add to the body count, Johnson. We're here to prevent one. Transport's bay doors exploded open with a rush of alien air that tasted like ozone and fear. And Thompson leaped into what could only be described as hell with. A scenic view, he hit the ground running, his powered armor absorbing the impact like it was designed to do, distributing the force across his entire body as his squad spread out in perfect formation. The training kicked in automatically, 20 weeks of simulated combat compressed into muscle memory that moved faster than thought around them. The air itself seemed to shimmer with the heat of orbital bombardment striking the outer machine formations. The sky was painted with streaks of plasma fire and the contrails of human fighters engaging mechanical death from above. It was like being inside a thunderstorm made of pure violence. But it was the silence that got to Thompson first. No birds. No insects. No wind through trees. The machines had consumed even the sounds of life, leaving behind a world that felt hollow, empty, wrong on a level that made human instincts scream warnings. The first verdant Thompson saw was barely chest high. Its flower-like head wilted with terror as it clutched something small and precious to its torso. When it spotted the approaching humans, it froze completely, not the smart tactical stillness of a trained soldier, but the absolute paralysis of a prey animal that knows it's been spotted by predators. Thompson felt something twist in his chest. The alien was beautiful in a way that made his throat tighten, graceful, delicate. With 4 slender arms and a face that looked like it had been carved from living crystal and decorated with petals that shifted color with emotion, this was A being designed by evolution for art and science and peaceful contemplation, and it was absolutely terrified of him. Thompson knelt down slowly, switching his helmet's universal translator online. The device had been programmed with every known galactic language, but this was its first field test with the Verdant. He really hoped the engineers had gotten the emotional context protocols right. "Hey there," he said in what he hoped was a gentle voice. "We're humans. We got your message. We're here to help." The alien's enormous eyes, easily twice the size of human eyes and the color of liquid gold, focused on Thompson's face with an intensity that made him feel like he was being examined by something infinitely older and wiser than himself. It made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze that the translator rendered as, "Warriors came. Death singers came for us. Death singers." Thompson felt his throat tighten at the translation. Is that what they called humans? Beings who sang songs of death? He thought about the Marines in the transports above, still singing their ancient battle hymns as they prepared to drop into combat. Maybe the aliens weren't wrong. "Yeah," Thompson whispered, his voice carrying 20 years of military service and a lifetime of keeping promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "We came." That's when he saw what the alien was holding. It was smaller than a human infant, with tiny forearms and a flower crown that barely had any petals. A child. A baby that couldn't have been more than a few days old, if Thompson was reading the biology right. The parent, because that's clearly what this was. A parent protecting their child made another wind chime sound that the translator couldn't quite process. But Thompson didn't need technology to understand. The sound was the same in any language, on any world, in any species. "Please don't hurt my baby." Thompson stood slowly, raising his rifle toward the approaching gray tide that rolled across the landscape like mechanical death itself. In the distance, he could see the machine's geometric nightmares the size of buildings, moving with purpose and coordination that spoke of intelligence far beyond simple programming. "Private Johnson," he called out without taking his eyes off. "The approaching threat. Set up a defensive perimeter around our new friends here. Everything else can wait." "But Sarge," Johnson protested, "we're supposed to move them to the extraction point." Thompson looked back at the young Marine with the kind of expression that had been passed down through military generations. "Johnson, we're not moving anyone anywhere until we know it's safe. These people trusted us enough to show themselves. We're not going to let them down." The machines were getting closer now, their forms becoming clearer against the gray wasteland they'd created. Each one was unique, built from the consumed remains of everything in its path: metal, stone, organic matter, all reformed into engines of pure consumption, and they were accelerating. Thompson shouldered his rifle and activated his squad communication. "System, all units. This is Thompson. We've got contact with friendlies and incoming hostiles. Rules of engagement are weapons free on anything that doesn't have 4 arms and pedals." Behind him, the verdant parent made another sound, not fear. This time, but something that might have been gratitude mixed with wonder. The baby in its arms made tiny chirping noises that sounded almost like laughter. Thompson smiled grimly as he took aim at the first machine to come within range. "Looks like we've got ourselves a war, Marines. Let's show these mechanical bastards why humans don't abandon our friends." The battle for Verdant Prime was about to begin in earnest, and somewhere in the growing darkness, more alien children were counting on strangers who traveled across the galaxy for no reason except that their parents had asked for help. Admiral Tom Brooks stood in the command center of fleet operations, watching numbers that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The tactical display showed Verdant Prime like a patient on life support, vital signs dropping, systems failing, time running out with mechanical precision. 8 hours into Operation Guardian Angel, and they'd evacuated 1.2 million Verdant civilians. Under normal circumstances, that would have been cause for celebration. Military historians would have called it the greatest rescue operation in galactic history, but these weren't normal circumstances. The cost was written in red across every screen in the command center. 200 ships lost and not damaged, not disabled, but completely destroyed. vaporized by machine weapons that adapted faster than human tactics could evolve. Over 400,000 Marines dead or missing, their life signs winking out on the display, like candles being snuffed by an invisible hand. Brooks had commanded fleets for 30 years. He'd seen combat in 7 different star systems, had made the hard decisions that kept humanity alive in a hostile galaxy. But he'd never watched an entire army die in real time, one soldier at a time. While knowing he was the one who'd sent them to their deaths, you know what the worst part of command is? It's not making the decision that gets people killed, it's living with the knowledge that every single one of those deaths has your signature on it. Yes, sir, whispered Lieutenant Colonel Janet Hayes, his aide-de-camp, and the woman who'd had the thankless job of delivering bad news for the past decade. Her voice carried the weight of someone who knew the words she was about to speak would change everything. Commander Reynolds is requesting authorization for Protocol Omega. Brooks closed his eyes and felt the weight of 3 million lives pressing down on his shoulders like a mountain made of guilt and responsibility. Protocol Omega. Even the name was designed to sound final, absolute, without hope of appeal. Planetary sterilization. They would turn the entire world into radioactive glass, killing every machine. Every trace of the plague, every living thing on the surface, including every human Marine still fighting down there. How many are still down there? Brooks asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Hayes consulted her tablet with the kind of clinical precision that military personnel use when dealing with numbers too horrible to process as human lives. Approximately 150,000 Marines, sir, scattered across 12 major battle zones, all cut off from extraction. Brooks felt his stomach turn to ice. 150,000 men and women who'd volunteered to risk everything for aliens they'd never met. Kids, most of them. 20-somethings who'd signed up to see the galaxy and ended up dying on a world whose name they couldn't even pronounce correctly. And ... Hayes' voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion she'd shown in 8 hours of delivering. Casualty reports. Nearly 800,000 verdant civilians trapped in the southern hemisphere. Transport ships can't penetrate the machine air defenses. The mechanical formations have created some kind of energy dome. Our pilots are calling it a death field. 800,000. Innocent civilians. The number hit Brooks like a physical blow. They were the reason humanity had come here in the first place, the voices crying out in the darkness, asking for help from strangers who owed them nothing. Brooks stared at the tactical display showing Verdant Prime as a dying world. Its surface, crawling with mechanical death. By every military calculation in the book, they should cut their losses. Protocol Omega would at least prevent the plague from spreading to other worlds. It was the smart choice, the logical choice, the choice that would save billions of lives across the galaxy. It was also the choice that would abandon nearly 1 million innocents to mechanical death. But here's the thing about command. Decisions, sometimes there is no right choice. Sometimes you just have to pick the wrong choice you can live with. Sir, incoming transmission from the surface, Communications Officer Lisa Park announced. It's Staff Sergeant Thompson. The image that flickered onto the main screen barely looked human anymore. Thompson's powered armor was melted slag, the ceramic plating cracked and bleeding coolant in a dozen places. His helmet was split open, revealing a face covered in blood and grime and something that might have been hope behind him. The landscape looked like hell had opened a branch office on Verdant Prime. The sky was the color of old blood. The ground was covered in ash that had once been living things, and in the distance, geometric nightmares the size of buildings moved with purpose that spoke of malevolent intelligence. Admiral Thompson said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much and still refused to quit. We found them. The verdant younglings, they're in massive underground cities, cavern systems that go down for miles. There could be 10 million children down here, sir. Maybe more. Brooks felt the world stop spinning around him. 10 million children. Not adults who'd made the choice to fight. Not soldiers who'd volunteered for combat duty, but children, babies, younglings who'd never seen the surface of their own world-hood. Spent their entire lives hiding in caves while their parents died above them to buy them just a few more hours of life. Sergeant Brooks said, his voice carrying the weight of command authority that he'd never wanted to use. Your orders are immediate extraction. We're initiating Protocol Omega in 2 hours. 2 hours.
Ow.
Enough time to get the surviving Marines off-planet. Not nearly enough time to evacuate 10 million children from underground cities that transport ships couldn't even reach. Thompson looked directly into the camera, and Brooks saw something in the Marine's eyes that reminded him why. Humans had gone from a single planet to masters of half the galaxy in just a few centuries. It wasn't technology or tactics or superior firepower. It was the absolute refusal to abandon anyone who'd asked for help. Thompson smiled, and it was the kind of expression that had made other species nervous about sharing a galaxy with humanity. Negative, sir. We're not abandoning them. Every Marine on this rock volunteers to stay. We'll hold the tunnel entrances as long as we can. Get every ship you have down here. The transmission cut to static, leaving Brooks staring at a blank screen that somehow contained the weight of the entire human condition. 150,000 Marines had just volunteered to die. It's not for their country, not for their species, not for territory or resources or strategic advantage. They'd volunteered to die for alien children they'd never met, in caves they'd never seen, on a world that wasn't even in their star charts a week ago. Brooks stared at the blank screen for a long moment, feeling the weight of a decision that would define not just his career, but humanity's place in the galaxy. Then he turned to his communications officer with the kind of calm authority that had kept human civilization alive for 1,000 years. Signal all vessels in the outer system, every freighter, every civilian transport, every cargo hauler with engines and life support. Full emergency requisition under Article 7 of the Colonial Defense Act. Hayes looked up from her tablet with wide eyes. Sir, that's going to strip every merchant marine vessel within 50 light years. We're talking about commandeering civilian ships. Brooks smiled, and for the first time in 8 hours, it reached his eyes. Then we'd better make sure we give them something worth requisitioning for, because that's what humans did. When the innocent cried out in darkness, humanity answered. When children needed protecting, humans volunteered to die. When the odds were impossible, and the smart choice was to walk away, humans doubled down and bet everything on doing the right thing. Even unto death, especially unto death, and somewhere in the caves beneath Verdant Prime. 10 million alien children were about to learn why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, or the most advanced, but because they were the only species crazy enough to keep their promises. The Battle of Verdant Prime lasted 22 hours and 38 minutes. But who's counting when you're witnessing the most heroic last stand in galactic history? When the smoke finally cleared and the last machine fell silent, Admiral Brooks stood on the bridge of his crippled flagship and stared at numbers that would redefine what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of civilized species. 1,200. The human warships had entered the Verdant system like an unstoppable force of nature. Now, only 67 burning hulks remained, barely capable of limping home on emergency power and prayers. The once mighty fleet looked like the survivors of an apocalypse scarred, broken, held together by determination and spare parts. Of the 3.2 million humans who'd answered the call when alien children cried out in darkness, only 800,000 survived. The mathematics of heroism, it turned out, were written in blood and calculated in lives willingly given. But here's the number that made Brooks' throat tighten with something between grief and overwhelming pride. 12.4 million Verdant lived. Every child, every elder, every poet and philosopher and dreamer on their peaceful world has been pulled from the jaws of mechanical extinction by strangers who owed them nothing and gave them everything. You want to know what real victory looks like? It's not about who wins or loses. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice to protect something worth protecting. And humanity had just written the definitive textbook on that subject. Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson died exactly the way he'd lived, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. They found him at Tunnel Complex 7, slumped against the entrance to the underground city where 10,000 Verdant children had hidden during the final assault. His rifle lay silent beside him, its power cell finally exhausted after 14 straight hours of continuous combat. The scene around Thompson's body told a story that would become legend. 87 machine carcasses lay scattered in concentric circles, each one destroyed by precise gunfire from a Marine who'd refused to give ground. His last grenade was still clutched in his dead hand, not because he'd failed to use it, but because he'd saved it for the moment when the children behind him were in direct danger. Thompson had died as he'd lived. Others didn't have to. The verdant younglings he'd died protecting did something unprecedented in their species' history. They carved his name into living crystal, using techniques their elders had reserved for their most sacred monuments. The inscription would grow for 1,000 years, becoming larger and more beautiful with each passing generation. Mike Thompson, Death Singer, who chose Life Death Singer. That's what the Verdant had called human warriors, beings who sang songs of death but chose to use their terrible gifts to preserve life. It was, perhaps, the most accurate description of humanity any alien species had ever produced. But the real measure of what happened at Verdant Prime wasn't written in casualty reports or tactical analyses. It was written in the hearts and minds of every sentient being in the galaxy who heard the story. 6 months later, the Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session. Representatives from 10,000 worlds gathered to discuss something that had never happened before. An entire species willing to sacrifice itself for complete strangers. The machine plague had been eradicated, burned out of existence by human fury and determination. But the cost had shaken every civilization in known space to its very foundation. How do you process the fact that a single species had lost 2.4 million souls to save aliens they'd never met? The Verdant Chancellor rose to address the assembly, her flower crown trembling with emotion as she spoke words that would echo through history. We cried into the void, expecting silence. Instead came warriors singing songs of death, who died singing songs of life. They knew nothing of us, not our names, our culture, our worth to the galaxy. They knew only that children were in danger, and they came. All of them came. You know, what's funny about heroism? The people doing it never think they're being heroic. No. They just think they're doing their job. But when 3.2 million humans volunteer to risk everything for alien children they've never met, the rest of the galaxy starts to pay attention. The Assembly's final resolution passed without a single dissenting vote, something that had never happened in galactic political history. Humanity was granted every military honor, every diplomatic privilege, every mark of respect their civilization could bestow. Trade routes were opened, technology was shared, military alliances were forged. Overnight, humanity went from a relatively unknown species to the most respected civilization in the galaxy. But here's what really mattered. It was a single line from the Chancellor's closing remarks that became humanity's true epitaph. Carved into monuments on 1,000 worlds, we called for salvation and received angels of war, called for mercy and learned the true meaning of love. Angels of war. The phrase spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Human soldiers were no longer seen as just another military force. They were seen as something mythical, legendary, beings who would cross the void itself to protect innocence. Galaxy would remember Verdant Prime for 1,000,000 years, but not for the tactics or the technology or the strategic implications. They would remember it for what it revealed about the human soul. They would remember that when children screamed in darkness, humanity heard them. When the innocent faced extinction, humans volunteered to stand between them and death. When the odds were impossible and the smart choice was to walk away, humans doubled down and proved that sometimes the smart choice is the wrong choice. And they would remember that price 2.4 million human lives given freely, without question, without regret, without any expectation of reward or recognition, because that's what humans do. When someone asks for help, we show up. When children are in danger, we volunteer.
Help.
When the innocent cry out in darkness, we roar, back with fury and determination that shakes the foundations of reality itself. We keep our promises, even when it kills us, especially when it kills us. The galaxy had learned something that day. There was a species out there that would literally die for strangers, that would sacrifice everything to protect nothing more than the hope that children might grow up safe. And Somewhere in the rebuilt cities of Verdant Prime, alien children played games and learned songs and grew up in peace, completely unaware that their entire existence had been purchased with human blood. But they would learn. Their parents would tell them, their teachers would explain, their history books would record the day that death singers chose life, that angels of war chose love, that humanity chose to be exactly what the galaxy needed most. Heroes who kept their promises, no matter the cost. The end.